Good morning. I was a little worried that attendance would be low since I sent out that reminder uh, pretty late, but it's like we have pretty good attendance. So let's give it a few more minutes and see who else comes in. Okay, so it's been a couple minutes. So let's get started. Before we begin, I was just wondering if anyone could volunteer to uh, take some notes and add a PR to include the minutes at the end of this meeting. Not getting a volunteer, so I'll do my best to fill this in myself, but if you'd like to help, that'd be super appreciated. Get started then. And there's only one item on the agenda, which I added. If there's anything else, please do note after I go over that item. The first one is PrestoCon is in 2 days. So please be on the lookout for that. If you haven't registered, there's still time to register. Tomorrow will be workshops and the technical talks will be on Thursday. So, I hope to see many of you there. Wanted to talk about basically just quickly kind of like review the code review and voting guidelines. These have been out actually for a long time, but I don't think that we've been following these very faithfully. And there's nothing official. This is sort of like more like guidance, and there's nothing kind of like officially required. The only thing that's strictly required is that a committer is according to the the rules of the TSC, that basically a committer approves the code. But I think that it's important to go over the rules around voting because it also kind of like goes into not just sort of like the rules for approving a PR, but also kind of like the etiquette. So I think like firstly, like this uses like +1 or -1 terminology. My understanding is that this is, very common terminology that's used in Apache land. But at a certain point here, um, like it's mentioned that essentially a +1 is like an approval, and then a -1 is a comment, where like some sort of comment asking for more clarification or some sort of change is left. So like for our purposes, we can consider +1 as approval, and a comment as a -1. I think strictly speaking, and this is consistent with the TSC rules, +1 binding vote is basically a committer approving or a code owner, which are committers approving a PR. So that's like strictly what's required to land a PR. A committer or code owner putting a -1 or requesting changes um, basically kind of like stops the PR until the technical reasons are addressed. And I think one important point that's mentioned here is that basically there's like the concept of binding and non-binding. So anyone in the world really can put a non-binding -1. But it's important to basically consider non-binding -1s with really careful consideration, and to make sure that we treat all these um, it really is a best practice as if it were a binding -1. Obviously, there's cases where you can go too far with this, and this will make you move really slowly. But in general, we don't really see that a lot. So good faith -1s, in general, I believe should be treated as if they're binding, and should be carefully addressed. That being said, there are legitimate differences. So, for example, like there could be differences in opinion for direction, and eventually, what this boils down to is, um, you would simply basically go with the binding vote, carefully note the considerations raised on the non-binding -1s, and basically just kind of like move on either through an issue or basically some way of tracking it. We can't like sort of like address every single issue in the world. I don't think that we see a lot of that, but like I think when push comes to shove, the committers kind of like will have the final say. Um, and That's pretty much it. I basically the intent for bringing this up is just sort of like wanting to review kind of like the etiquette for disagreeing on PRs. If there's ever kind of like, I think like examples where we feel like a certain change hasn't been given its due consideration. Basically, I think now's a good time to bring that up, or we can bring it up on Slack, or kind of like address these as time goes on. But I wanted to highlight this article, especially the voting, and really this is kind of like about code review and PR merge, specifically, just because I think like this has really important cultural implications, and basically this kind of like gives us etiquette, whereas like the TSC rules kind of give us the letter of the law. This gives us kind of like the spirit, and kind of like how we should be treating code review disagreements, and the process. um, and I think like the rest of this is really kind of like straightforward. The commit formatting and pull requests, a lot of this is kind of like duplicate information. We also have this in the contributing.md, so we'll probably clean this up. Attribution is important. Sometimes it's difficult to kind of like specifically attribute like exact lines of code, because like code might have been changed, but we should always basically at least include the co-authored so that credit is given where it is due. Lastly, I think like one really important thing that I wanted to mention is I think as a project we can do better focusing on documentation. I think, like this is also something culturally in the past we've, sort of like shied away from documentation, but I think over the years it's become pretty clear that um, certain abstractions that made sense and were obvious at the time, as time goes on and as the code base gets larger, um, becomes very difficult to kind of like reverse engineer every single important abstraction and its intended purpose and meaning. So I think like the spirit of this is to not, you know, add Javadoc for every method. Um, but at the very least, like important abstractions should have, basic Javadoc. New features should, sort of have, documentation with examples um, uh, in our public documentation. And I think that this is something that all the committers can kind of like be on the lookout for and kind of like enforce. I know that we've been doing this, kind of like off and on in the past, but just something to kind of like it's probably something where we'll never be perfect, but we should probably um, strive for improvement. And sort of like as time goes on, just because like the code base is vast, there's a lot of undocumented changes. Probably consider as we make new changes and sort of like reconsider and reshape different abstractions to go back and follow the campsite rule where we try to leave the campsite basically better than we found it, and that I think can include documentation on our intuitive sense of like the purpose for these various abstractions and basic kind of like directional guidance on how they should be used. Cool. So that's all I had, and that was all that was on the agenda. I did also want to kind of like bring up a quick update. The TSC voting is a little bit delayed. So if you look on kind of like the TSC repo, basically the current TSC class should be up for election in November. There's been some delays because of turnover from the Linux Foundation, where essentially our representative has changed, and we're trying to kind of like, you know, basically kind of like certain things are starting from scratch from the new representative. So that should be sort of like get sorted out soon. Those of you who are eligible to self-nominate, I'll reach out to all of you so that you can submit your self-nomination and we can get that process going. I don't picture that it'll take longer than another week or two. So, but I just wanted to mention kind of like an update on that since several people have asked. Okay. That's all I had. I'll stop sharing my screen and open up the floor to see if there's anything else that anyone wanted to discuss or bring up. Going once, going twice. I don't see any unmutes, so I will take that as no questions. Obviously, if there's anything that you'd like to talk about, you can feel free to reach out on Slack, join the next TSC meeting, and you can also reach out to me personally on the Presto DB Slack. All right, thanks, folks. We'll leave 45 minutes early. See you at PrestoCon.
Great, thank you.
Bye.